When the pandemic struck, we had to deal with the industry upheaval due to reductions in flights. But that time of resurgence and high traffic emerged with new rules and procedures in place. During this resurgence, we saw a staggering increase in unruly passenger events that threatened the safety and the security of our flights. For our next panel, I'd like to ask Captain Wolfgang Koch and his panel to take the stage to discuss the current situation with crimes aboard our aircraft. Captain Koch.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon once again. Here to discuss the increase in confronting the unruly nature of passengers on board aircraft. Recognizing that the long-standing issue of unruly passenger poses an everyday challenge to our aviation industry, we have assembled a diverse panel with vast expertise to offer a renewed perspective as we confront the recent surge in both the quantity and gravity of unruly passenger events. Today's conversation will include from three important points of view. We will be getting a perspective on TSA resources and processes from Serge Potapov, who serves as the Executive Director of Flight Programs at the TSA. We will be receiving a perspective from FBI Special Agent Dave Rodski, who will discuss FBI response before and after flights, and Ms. Taneesha Marshall will provide her perspective as FAA Assistant Chief Counsel and the work the FAA is doing as they take their reign on prosecution on unruly passengers. To begin the conversation and have a better understanding of your roles, can each of you please take a moment to introduce yourselves and describe your involvement in addressing the unruly passengers? Dave.
Again, my name is Dave Rodski. I'm an FBI agent, been an agent for 22 years, mostly worked terrorism. My last ISIS case, he went to prison for 20 years. But I've been doing aviation part-time since 2009, full-time since 2018. You can read my bio. I've been around the world, but I do as many things wrong as right. I love my job, and I literally would give my life for what you all do to try and keep you safe. Enough said.
Taneesha.
And good afternoon. My name is Taneesha Marshall. As Wolfgang mentioned, I am the Assistant Chief Counsel for our Aviation Litigation Division with the FAA's Office of Chief Counsel. I've been with the FAA approximately 20 years. Started off enforcing cases in our southern region, which actually held and have seen more of passenger interference cases than any of our other regions had. Did that over a decade, reviewing hundreds of cases, working closely with the investigators, and then after that went into management and personnel law, and then came back to the Enforcement Division over the last couple years. As far as the FAA's approach, given the, I'm sure all of you, as you can see from the video that Dave showed, there's been a huge increase in both the numbers as well as the behavior of cases. As a result, the FAA has a three-component zero tolerance approach, no tolerance approach to how we handle passenger interference cases. That first involves our Special Enforcement Emphasis Program. That program came out, or that policy came out in January of 2021 when we realized that there had been a huge increase in proliferation of these passenger interference cases. And so what that involves is that the investigators within the FAA will investigate cases involving passenger interference that may be under either US Code 46318 involving sexual or physical assault, the threat of sexual or physical assault, as well as anything else that would be an imminent threat to an aircraft. So if there's any elements of that that's involved in that investigation, it comes to my office. And we'll investigate it, and when necessary, we'll issue and prosecute those passengers with civil penalties. The third component of that is that we also have an interface and interchange of information with TSA. And so we provide information to TSA on those passenger interference cases. And then the third component of that is that we also work closely with the FBI for criminal referrals. So for those very egregious acts, they not only have an administrative penalty through our agency, but we also make sure that they're handled appropriately through criminal procedures with the FBI.
Thank you, Taneesha. Over to you, Serge.
Good afternoon, everyone. Serge Potapov with TSA's Office of Law Enforcement, also the Federal Air Marshal Service. Been in federal law enforcement for 22 years now. Sort of span the scope of several different field offices that I operated in, the training center in Atlantic City. Most recently, I was at our Washington field offices in ASAC at the height of COVID. So I got to live some of these experiences that Dave just showed. Some of our teams were involved in some of these incidents. But also been really enjoying more recently working with the crew members, FFDOs, pilots, other crew members in sort of expanding our ability to deliver more training to crew members and crew member self-defense, collaborating on new ways that we can potentially mitigate these issues. We're never going to, I don't think, solve it 100%, but definitely equip our crew members, our partners, to better handle these situations if we're there, if we're not there. And clearly work with the FBI to hand over and have them deal with the investigation, support them along the way, and the FAA as well. More recently, I'm over at TSA headquarters, over our flight operations division, also our flight programs branch. It's probably going to change in terms of our name, in terms of flight programs branch, to probably something more along the lines of mission programs, because we're expanding. If you don't know, we expanded sort of our perspective on how we're allocating our law enforcement resources throughout the defense chain. We just recently published the new LEFAMS roadmap. The administrator will probably talk about that later today, which articulates a whole broader threat context for us of how we are deploying our resources in the aviation and transportation security space. So we recognize that all kinds of threats have evolved over the last 10 plus years since, even since our genesis of growth after 9/11. So we recognize that we now have to figure out a way to sort of re-optimize how we reallocate our resources, upskill our personnel to be able to deal with some of these things, work alongside the FBI to assist with investigations and our other partners. So again, thank you very much for having me here.
Excellent. Thank you. So originally we had planned on 4 panelists today, and unfortunately Michele Freadman could not make it here to us today. I'd like to take a moment to recognize her for her aviation security work she has been part of for many years. I myself had met Michele back probably 13 years ago and have known of her for over 20 years. I'll read a little bio part for her and just sort of mention the work that she is doing presently on behalf of Unruly passengers. So Michele is now retired Deputy Director of Aviation Security Programs for the Massachusetts Port Authority. In her 18-year tenure, she directed the development, implementation, and management of aviation security programs, policies, and initiatives. Prior roles included Deputy Director of Aviation Security Operations, the Airport Security Coordinator for Boston Logan International Airport, and the Deputy Director of Corporate Security. In these roles, she implemented innovative and nationally recognized programs to enhance aviation security. And it was at that point that I had first taken note of the very excellent work she does on behalf of aviation security, where she actually mandated the program for behavioral recognition for all frontline employees at ticket counters of the airlines that were tenants at her airport. And she made it mandatory that all frontline employees had that training, and they had to get recertified every year. And why was that? I think we know that there was someone who walked through that terminal back in 2001, and one of those ticket agents actually recognized some bad behavior about this person, but really never expressed that. So I took note of that, one of those programs that she started with. So in her work today, Michele's has started a federally funded research project funded by the FAA, reducing and managing disruptive and unruly behavior in airports. It's through this airport cooperative research program that she's involved. The project objective of this research is to develop a guide to reducing and managing disruptive and unruly behavior incidents in a commercial airport setting. So her perspectives in the work that she's doing, this behavior is a This behavior is a societal issue which is spilled over to airports and aviation. We see this behavior throughout our society as evidenced by increased incidents of road rage, unruly behavior at school board meetings, sporting events, and just to name a few. Unruly and disruptive behavior is a multifaceted, multifactorial, and multi-stakeholder issue and research topic. To conduct this complex research, their interdisciplinary research team is composed of law enforcement, aviation subject matter experts with expertise in airports, airlines, aviation security, emergency operations, mental health, and homelessness. So that's sort of a brief overview of those perspectives that she's bringing into the discussion of unruly behavior. So we'll start off with some questions, and this is to all of you here. But each of you brings a distinct viewpoint when it comes to the matter of unruly passenger events. Considering the threat landscape, how has it evolved over time, and what is your assessment of the current environment? Dave, I'll start with you.
The very first thing I would say is, evidentiary speaking, we have these, and it's one of the most critical pieces of evidence that we get and we gather. And absent more than one or two witnesses, it's a he said, she said, and they're declined by prosecution. So speaking how we go after these folks criminally, that's the first thing. Second of all, it's just the behavior. It's just out to lunch. I mean, I wanted to, you're all pilots. I want you all to focus, A, on what the incidents are, but B, the victims. We cannot say enough. The amount of rapes that I've charged in the air, there's patterns to those. There are always red eyes, things like that. But sex assaults is another big one, which seems to have taken off. But with the Ambien, Benadryl, people take things when they're on board flights, so that's evolved. Thirdly, we cannot forget, and people are just such an instant society, of the impact of flight operations. Every flight that you all pilot in this room, that we impact that aircraft, I promise you, and I say this to anybody that's in the air, I guarantee you that somebody on board that aircraft is going to their wedding day, their mom's funeral or something. We're impacting these passengers. As funny as the gentleman exposing himself, who, by the way, just pled guilty last month in federal court for the lewd act, we charged him. And we're trying to charge every single one of these folks. FBI, we're taking all these cases. But we cannot forget the victims of these incidents and really the impact that it has on those victims. Enough said.
Absolutely. I understand that. So Taneesha, over to you.
Just to kind of piggyback on what Dave said, the number that has come in has obviously, as many of you know, firsthand, has drastically increased. But what we've also seen, we were talking about this a little bit behind the scenes here, is that when I first started doing this 20 years ago, a non-smoking case was considered a serious case, or someone, maybe yelling or getting up during flight was considered serious. The behavior has changed so much over the landscape where there's two types of civil penalties and legal enforcement actions that our office takes and the teams across the U.S. And primarily, they would be under the Federal Aviation Regulations under Part 121, which you all are familiar with. And that was just for your, I'll say, run-of-the-mill standard passenger interference cases. The really more serious ones fall under our federal statute of the 49 U.S.C. 46318, and that's for that physical assault, the threat of physical assault, the sexual assault. We did not have a lot of those cases. And now, in recent years, it's become so commonplace to have these sexual assaults. And as Dave might have mentioned, not just the sexual nature of them, the ages. There's just a lot more of age, the cases with younger kids being involved in this, older individuals. There's a disregard for, just for others on this aircraft. So we've definitely seen a number of that. And it's also caused us to increase, Congress has increased our civil penalties actions. So penalties used to be range $1,000, $2,000 for many of our cases. Congress changed the statute to now be up to what was $25,000 for the sexual and physical assaults. It's now $35,000. And we have, I'll give some data later, and we're issuing millions of dollars in these each year just to try to deter this behavior. So like I said, increase in number, increase in behavior, and it's definitely made us have to take more serious action to try to deter it.
It just doesn't seem enough, even those civil penalties,
Yeah.
to stop this. Thank you, Taneesha. Serge, over to you.
Nothing else to add for, clearly from the federal air perspective, the incidents that we do get involved with tend to be quite violent. If we're on board, if we have to take action because we fall within the sort of the common strategy. So working with our crew members in terms of what they're going to handle, what we're going to handle, how we're going to handle it. And if we do get involved, it tends to be on the more violent side of things. And we are experiencing it too, the uptick, and relative to pre-COVID. And I guess for us, all I have is anecdotal information about the behaviors. I'm really interested to see what emerges out of research, studies, things that Michele is working on. I've worked with Michele for over a decade now on previous projects, and I know she does really good work. But to sort of understand what is driving this and how can we sort of incorporate that into how we operate, how we train, how we share that information with our stakeholders, our partners, to prevent it from even manifesting on board in the first place. When it's already happening on board, it's happening, we have to deal with the threat, it's almost too late. We can mitigate it, but it's a huge disruption. How do we prevent it from even happening in the first place is what I'm really sort of interested in. That's kind of where my headspace is right now.
It is a disruption of the entire ecosystem, right? When we think about it, from passengers, airports, communities, people, you name it, it's everyone. Taneesha, over to you. Could you give us an insight now as to what some of the current incidents that you're working and maybe enforcement action data for this year?
No, definitely. One thing I'll add too, after Serge mentioned that, as far as some trends, a lot of the behavior that used to be disruptive was usually alcohol related, or it was medications, and so we've also seen an increase in that behavior. And like you said, the research will be interesting because we're noticing that there isn't an element of that alcohol or medication, but the behavior and the egregious is still present. But as far as the data that we have, when the cases come into the FAA under our zero tolerance policy, they are categorized into 3 priorities. And so when the investigators get those, the first top priority are those egregious cases, those involving the physical sexual assaults, the threats, something that is going to be potentially, cause a diversion, to cause the aircraft to divert, things involving damage to the aircraft. That's our priority 1. And then priority 2 cases are those where there is a behavior, a pattern, a continued noncompliance by passengers. And then the third one is more of a passive noncompliance. And so just looking over, since December 1st of 2020, the FAA has opened approximately 2,300 passenger misconduct investigations. And in that time frame, we've initiated, my office has initiated almost 1,200 of those cases, proposing approximately $18.1 million in civil penalty. And we have already assessed during that time frame, meaning that my teams have gone ahead and concluded these matters in 700 cases, totaling $7.3 million in civil penalties. And this year alone, as of September 7th, we have initiated, there's been 354 investigations into passenger interference already investigated. And we have issued, my office has issued approximately 300 of those in enforcement actions. And we've proposed already, again, since January of this year, $4.6 million in civil penalties. Of those cases that I've mentioned, I said approximately about 2,200 of those, right around 350 of those, or a little under 300, have also been referred to the Department of Justice for criminal cases. And so it continues to go on. Back in December or January of 2020, before the pandemic hit its height, we approximately got about 100 cases a month of passenger nationwide that would come in to our my different teams. In March of 2021, we had 720 cases come in 1 month. So in the matter of a little over a year, it had gone 7 times as high of a number, so much so that in my division, we created a special team that was targeted specifically at addressing passenger interference cases. So along with this policy I mentioned, we just had to take some measures we had not encountered before because of unprecedented numbers to try to deter this behavior. So obviously 2021 was definitely where it hit its peak. In January 2022, it's decreased down to about 500 cases a month. And then most recently in January 2023, we're at about 300 cases a month. But again, in December of 2020, we're again at 100. So although the number has decreased from when it was in its peak, we are still seeing an uptick of these cases. Again, hoping that the increase in civil penalty actions our increase in our range is to turn this behavior. But again, the research that Michele and others do, I think, will also go a long way in helping us try and figure out how to get ahead of these before they become legal actions.
Good, I look forward to that we find a solution or at least mitigate some of the effects of what's going on there. So this is a question to all three of you here. The responsibility to mitigate, prepare, and respond to unruly passenger incidents lies within many stakeholders, both at the local and federal level. In managing these incidents, how would you describe the nature of your work with the relevant authorities? And are there potential areas for improvement? So I think, Dave, I'd like to start with you. I think
Sure. So just to set the stage for everybody in the room, you're all pilots. And again, I'm speaking to you, I know there's some non-pilots in the room. In the event of an in-flight incident, and when we say in-flight incident, once that door shuts, it's in what's called the Special Aircraft Jurisdiction of the United States. FBI has primary jurisdiction for that, anything that happens on board. And we're just learning recently with a voyeurism in the air that's not covered under the statutes. We're working to fix that. But regardless, anything that happens on board that aircraft, and the reason being is we don't know where the crime took place, whether it's an LAX to BWI flight, it may have happened over Iowa, it may have happened, so the FBI is going to take that case. However, while you're still on the ground, there's joint jurisdiction. So think of that aircraft as no different than a bus. You're on the ground in Maryland, you're on the ground in California. There's dual jurisdiction between the state or local jurisdiction. LAX, it's LAWA, LA World Airport Authority Police, Port Authority for New York. It's going to vary by the airport. And we're going to work side by side. The Category X airports, the Cat X airports, we're hand in hand with every law enforcement officer that's there. So we'll take that case. And sometimes it can go both ways, state and federal, and we will charge federally. But hopefully those videos, and I will go back to the videos again, I put those videos up for a specific reason. At least 2 of the 4 videos, pilots, we need you. Pilots were interceding on whether it be getting somebody off the aircraft or an actual physical assault. And those 2 are on the ground at that point. But we also need flight crews to hang around. And it is going to be one team approach. But primarily, it's going to be law enforcement, primarily FBI and the local law enforcement at that airport with you and your flight crew. We need everybody to hang around. We know we've got to time out, we've got to connect. I hate to say hubs. I know the hub and spoke system's gone away, the large stations you have to go through. But it's not just a call to your knock or the ACAR system, whatever you end up using with a DEN or an in-flight incident with ATC, requesting law enforcement meet that aircraft. And we FBI better not let you down. We'll be there. It's 2 a.m. We got local law enforcement that are reading the aircraft. Every officer I know, they're going to collect that stuff for us. And collecting that evidence, getting those victim and witness statements, and again, putting your passengers first. I cannot say that enough. We've got to put the passengers first. That's who we're all here. They're ultimately the victims in all these things. But as to how it works, we'll take it through prosecution from there. And almost all those cases you saw have all been prosecuted this year. We will, and we owe it to you. We will charge all of these folks criminally. Separate, by the way, from the civil prosecution. 2 quick examples on those. 2 of those individuals, I hate to say they got off with minimal fines. We were like, yeah, $500 penalty on the criminal case. And they were like, wow, that's all I have to pay is $500. Not knowing that the civil enforcement action by the FAA was soon to follow with $9,000 to $31,000 in civil penalties that they're going to have to pay. So the civil actions done by the FAA are completely different than the criminal actions done by FBI, which may, by the way, be completely separate from these state violations. We can get them on as well. But you all in this room are an important part of that. And the number of times I have to chase down crew members, pilots or flight attendants will only give me their name as being N29327. That's my employee number, so I'm not going to give you my name, FBI. You're the victims as well. We need you to cooperate with us. We're not the bad guys. That's all.
All right. Taneesha, over to you with the question.
I completely echo everything that Dave was saying in regard to just the collaboration. So obviously we collaborate, like I said, we work hand in hand with the FBI, with TSA, anyone else, because it could be that one incident has, like I said, multiple violations and multiple investigations that occur as a result of it. So we definitely always want to make sure that the main thing is just making sure that the passenger or passengers are being taken care of or being handled appropriately. And one thing that he really touched on that I think is really critical is just getting those statements, making sure that the flight crew stays around. We want to ensure that, you know, what I've noticed, and even when I used to have trials on these, not a lot of these go to trial, but when I did have trials on these, it's hard enough, you know, for the flight crew. You're obviously, you know, trying to make sure that this aircraft gets from point A to point B, and that's not an easy feat, as well as with the crew that's involved. And so to now, in addition to all of that, have to do these passengers, do these statements, and be involved, I get it. And then possibly have to be a witness later on. I get it, but the more that you can do, you know, to help us help you, then it makes our cases stronger. It helps to deter these matters from going any further than they have to. So again, we're trying to do everything that we can to work together. I think Dave said one team, and that really is, you know, what we want to make sure that it's clear. We obviously are the regulators, but together is trying to keep the, I think someone said earlier, it's not just as safe or safer. So we really want to make sure that we're keeping, you know, airspace as safe as we can, as well as safer if anything can be possible. So just collaboration is really what we're trying to strive for.
So Taneesha, I hear maybe what you're saying is there should be more of a robust reporting procedure after the events within crew coming to the authorities to ensure that the incidents are properly documented and accounted for, right? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I could say robust in some ways, but honestly, just speaking, not just because I'm in front of pilots and I don't want anyone to throw anything at me, but honestly, I would say it's more sometimes consistency. We definitely have some really strong cases. So there are cases that have come in to the teams that I, you know, haven't seen recently, but and some of those that I have pulled where there were some really strong cases. I mean, the evidence and the statements that was there, without a doubt, made it to where outside of that individual possibly showing a financial hardship, there wasn't any question about the violations, and we felt comfortable going forward with the degree and the severity of the penalty. It's just a reminder more than anything. So you're right. So it's you know, want to make sure that it's just a reminder that that we're consistently the flight crew standard, that we're getting those reporting. So yeah, I mean, anything would help.
Very good. Something good to take back. Serge, over to you. What do you see that there's some room for improvement?
So in terms of, can you guys hear me?
Nope.
All right, how about if I sound, oh, here we go.
I hear you now.
All right. So in terms of our responsibility, to respond, we recognize that as TSA's Office of Law Enforcement, Federal Air Marshal Service, you know, we're going through the beginning stages of a significant change in terms of our organization, sort of how we're organized, what we address, things we're going to be going after, and how we're going to be supporting our stakeholders better vis-a-vis the publication of the new roadmap. So we clearly can do a better job. We need to sort of reorganize how we respond to that. We've been doing that for the past 10 months. We've been doing many more aviation operations on the ground, deploying certain personnel to be there to support our stakeholders because there are shortages across the board, local law enforcement, to be there to help provide whatever uplift is necessary from our resources. Better sort of training our folks to how to respond to these things in terms of sort of the supporting the FBI's investigation, in terms of statements and all those things that need to be sort of solidified. But I would also say in terms of just can we do better? Yes, I think, you know, as a whole we can, as a team, you know, in terms of the shared responsibility of reporting things that just don't seem right to us before it even is allowed to happen on board the aircraft. There's probably a lot of indicators out there. I don't have the answer to that. I've worked in the insider threat space for a very long time. I know there's a lot of potential risk indicators that people oftentimes overlook that can prevent an insider threat from happening. I'm sure there's probably similarities there in terms of potential behavioral indicators that we could pick up on, but oftentimes overlooked because we're being rushed in our jobs on the ground and may allow a threat from presenting itself on board in the first place. So I know it's a kind of a broad non-answer, but I think there's a lot of work that can be done. I'm really interested in the research, how we can sort of really sort of come up with some observable indicators and sort of process improvements to help respond collectively as a team.
That's perfect. That's a perfect lead-in, actually, to this next question for all of you again. But it then goes to the behavioral detection prior to getting on board an aircraft. But this question goes as such. There are hundreds of airports, airlines, and vendors contributing to our daily aviation environment. Understanding that certain policies can and do vary between each airline and each airport, have there been considerations that current policies could be enabling unruly behavior that can potentially escalate into criminal acts? So actually, Serge, why don't I start with you first, and then we'll work our way back.
I don't know if it's necessarily just policies. I think there are organizational factors that sort of drive people to do certain things sometimes, again, kind of leaning back on my insider threat sort of world, that we could probably draw from because that discipline's been really matured over the last 10 years to help deal with what is driving some of these people to do what they're doing today, whether it's organizational, whether it's personal factors, whether it's other sort of societal factors, I don't know. But I definitely do think that there could be policies that are out there. I don't know what those policies are that potentially could be triggering someone to behave a certain way, but I think a lot of it's just, from what I've seen, just, alcohol related, whether it's just disregard to authority, to commands of the flight crew or anybody else or the crew, and just complete disregard. And I don't know exactly what is driving those right now, but certainly there could be policies that are triggering them.
I always like to look at it as we've come from fascination of flight to frustration of flight. And that's where we are, I think, in today's society. But Taneesha, how about your perspective there?
Not much to add to what Serge said. I agree, and no pun intended, the surge in cases that we had, that we were talking about in the last year. I wouldn't say that immediately my thought is it's a policy, as far as within the air carriers. There's just a lot of like society. There's just all these unknowns that, again, the research will definitely help to shed light on. But, one thing that we have, that is, that differs is the alcohol. I mean, alcohol always can play a part, right? And there are different policies among the different carriers. So, that may very well be a factor, that of many that may be playing a part. But right now, it's just, these numbers are unprecedented. And so it's really hard for me to speak or pin down specifically or if it's related to a policy. There hasn't been any significant changes in carrier policies, that I would say would correlate and that I can immediately think of. So that's not what comes to mind. There's several factors.
Okay. Dave?
Policy, the only thing I would ever say about policy is, and it's none of us in this room that are going to be able to fix this one, but on the I don't want to say the no-fly list, because that's a term that's misused way too much. The no-fly list is a government TSA, secure flight thing. But in the do not board list, regulated by internally airlines themselves, the number of emails, things that I'll go in writing to write to corporate at each air carrier to make sure that this person never boards your aircraft again, I'll do in a heartbeat. And I'll talk about how I'm going to go after them in a second, but I wish on the policy side we could find a way. Delta was leading this for a while. Delta Legal was really trying to share those lists, the do not board lists. You're a private entity. I trash a Target store tomorrow, Target could refuse me service. Any company can refuse service if somebody's that disruptive. So we got to fix that in the policy. That's not going to happen in this room. What I really want to impress upon all of you in here, and it's reminding me about these things, is actually thinking outside the box of policy. Forget about policy. To give you some examples, the way we try and go after these folks in any way, shape, or form possible. And I wouldn't say I enjoy this or have fun with this, but in a classic case of a passenger touching a female, that's not enough to get a criminal charge. Touched her leg, rubbing her thigh or something like that. I can't get a prosecutor to charge that individual. I don't have enough witness statements. Well, you know what? I'm going to think outside the policy box. We're going to go to that guy's house. I'm going to hunt him down. And there's no joke in this. I'm going to actually go after his wife in the sense that I'm going to talk to the wife that, hey, your husband likes to touch other women's legs, everything like that. I'm going to light him up any way I possibly can with a visit to his house by law enforcement, such that the behavior stops. It's completely outside the box of thinking policy, but oftentimes we go after these folks any way we can. Anybody, by the way, that we interact with in the FBI, we're going to index them. And there's another one I want you all to be reassured that what we do in FBI indices, it's not a criminal history thing, but should that passenger, no matter what the behavior is, sexual through misbehaving, alcoholism, or anything like that, or mental health issues, we're gonna put them in our indices so that there's another incident with that passenger at Phoenix Sky Harbor, JFK, O'Hare. FBI, local law enforcement will know that passenger is a repeat offender because they're in our systems. That's unfortunately not shared outside the FBI, but at least we're indexing everybody that we come across. I hate to say just reading them the riot act, but scare them. And I've threatened a lot of people to no-fly them myself, which, by the way, is an empty threat. I can't legally do that. But we want to change the behavior. I want to make sure whatever they did on board your aircraft, they'll never do again. That's really what I'm after with some of these policy things.
I appreciate that. That's great. Well, thank you for your answers. I think we're out of time here, but let's give this group a big round of applause. Thank you, guys.